Hello and welcome to the Now Spinning Magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston. And on this episode, I'm delighted to have with me John McKie, acclaimed music writer and former editor of Smash Hits and Q Magazine, to talk about his new book, Prince, A Sign of the Times, published by Bonnier Books on the 18th of September. This is a kaleidoscopic, I put here, I don't know why I put that word, I can hardly pronounce it, people-powered book at Prince, built from over 200 interviews, which is a fair few, with bandmates, engineers, ex-girlfriends, bodyguards, personal assistants, chefs probably. We're going to dig into why John chose Sign of the Times as the prism, as the main focal point for this book, and also the myth versus the man. And yes, that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame guitar solo will probably come up in the conversation. So if you love Prince, or maybe you're just curious about how a singular artist could bend popular culture to their will, this is going to be the right place to be. So welcome, John. And this is a huge book on Prince. So my first question is going to be, when did Prince click with you? Was it a Top of the Pops appearance, or was it Sign of the Times? What was it?
You've got to be careful because it's. I think it was like seeing him in Entertainment USA, which was with Jonathan King. So that's not something that we really talk about that much. But I remember being fascinated by the American charts from an early age. So things like Paul Gambaccini's show on Radio Two, and I think I heard Little Red Corvette, and I heard 1999, and then I heard DMSR from that album, that double album. And
Yeah.
I just thought, is it the same guy did all these records, really? And then, by the time Purple Rain came out, I was interested. But then I think it was only when it got to Sign of the Times, when I would have been about 15, 16, and that record came out, and I just thought, see, I'm showing my age now, but I just thought, what a remarkable man to make this kind of record where it goes into all these different directions.
Very true.
And, I think when you grew up reading the music press, as you have and I have, because we were talking about it just before we went on air. When you grow up reading the music press, the Beatles are always the touchstone because of, I don't know, I'm guessing you're a Beatles fan.
Yeah.
But, you listen to the Beatles records and it's the ambition and the spread and the musical depth and the playfulness. And, I think Prince is up there with that, and Stevie Wonder's up there with that, and Prince is up there with that in terms of just that difference of styles, that palette, that really rich sense of, look what I can do. I can do this. I can do this.
Yeah.
And so, I kind of fell in love there. And then, once I saw him live, it was game over because I don't know if you were lucky enough to have seen Prince live, but
No, I wasn't, no.
there were a few others that matched him, because he could do a guitar solo for 10 minutes, one second, and then he would turn around and he'd be dancing in his heels, and he'd go over to the piano and do something incredibly complex the next. And, not everyone can do that.
No, they can't. I don't think a lot of people who are on the outside of the Prince kind of orbit probably didn't realize just what a fantastic multi-instrumentalist he was. Now, this book, what did you feel, where was the gap on the Prince bookshelf that you felt that this book would land?
I think that's a very, very gentle and polite way of asking what could be seen as an impertinent question, which is, there's loads of books about Prince. Why are you writing another one? Which would be a totally reasonable question. There are quite a few books about Prince. And, I think what they say is, it's like I'd hesitate to call it a work of art, but it's like any creative endeavor, which is that you want to do something that's not already out there.
Good.
And so I think for me, Alan Light had written a book. There's an American music writer called Alan Light who wrote a book about the making of Purple Rain. And it was the fact that Prince did this amazing movie called Purple Rain. He did this amazing soundtrack album called Purple Rain, obviously, the same year, 1984. And Alan also wrote a book which fascinated me about Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. And I think it's called The Holy and the Broken, if I've got that right. But it's Alan Light Hallelujah. You will find it in all, online book retailers. And what was interesting about that book was he interviewed, Bono, and he interviewed Justin Timberlake, who had both done cover versions of Hallelujah. He talked about how the song had been used for Hurricane Katrina tributes, but also in American Idol, and it had become massive that way. He talked about Jeff Buckley and Jeff Buckley's life. He talked about Leonard Cohen's creative processing on the Casio. He talked to all these different people who'd done versions of it. He really dug deep into the song. And so there were two things with Alan Light's book. One was that I thought yeah, Purple Rain's great. And Sign of the Times, but Sign of the Times is better. And, the Purple Rain movie is great, but the Sign of the Times movie is better. And, if you haven't seen Prince, I would beg the BBC or Channel 4 or Sky to show Sign of the Times every year, because if people could see just how multi-talented Prince was, they would be Prince fans too. But also, I looked at Alan's other book on Hallelujah that I just mentioned, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to kind of tinker under the bonnet of all 16 songs of Sign of the Times and look at them in terms of, the way he played a guitar solo, which is I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man, the way he used the Fairlight synthesizer in the drum machine, the Lynn drum machine, which is Sign of the Times, the way that he did vocals, which was Adore, the last track of the album, Prince's own faith and his philanthropy, which is The Cross. And so that's what I ended up doing. And so I ended up starting speaking to people that were around at the time. And then, what can I tell you? It kind of got out of hand, because I then started trying to speak to people who weren't around at the time, because to understand Sign of the Times, you've got to understand how Prince had the bravery to do that record. And he had the bravery to do that record because he did Purple Rain. And how did he do Purple Rain? Well, he paid for it with a tour that he put together with bands that he kind of invented.
Yeah.
And then so you go back to that and then you go, where did this drive come from? And it came from the fact that his parents were both musicians, but probably didn't make a living as musicians. So that drove him to make sure that if he was going to be a musician, he was going to make darn sure that he made a living from it. And so you go back to that. And then while you're about all that, you then go, well, what happened after the Sign of the Times? So so that's why the book is 500 pages, and that's why the book has got 220 interviews in it. And if you get it for Christmas and you're not a Prince fan, I apologize. But if you get it for Christmas and you're a Prince fan, I think you'll enjoy it.
It's a fascinating story, and you say it is big, and it's 220 interviews. How did those interviews? At what point did you start to map the story of the book? Because you couldn't have known at the beginning you were going to do 220 interviews.
No, I think that's right. I think if somebody said this, if the publishers had phoned me, 5.5 years ago and said, right, we want you to do this book, but you've got to do 220 interviews, I'd have run a mile. I think what happened was it was lockdown, so I was kind of lucky in some respects. So I was in lockdown and I was furloughed as well, which was doubly fortunate. So I just started hitting people up and saying, would you talk to me about Prince? And of course, loads of people said no. So this book's got 220 interviews, but it's probably got about 1,000 people that didn't want to speak to me,
Because didn't some of the people take about 3 to 4 years to persuade them to actually talk to you? So, I mean,
yeah, some did, yeah.
How did you finally get them to unlock the door to let you in? I mean, was it a kind of, they just thought, oh God, not him again?
I mean, you couldn't blame them if they did. I'm a great believer in my day job is working for charity and persuading people to help for that.
Right.
And so I have to be very respectful when somebody passes or somebody says no. I have to be very, very respectful, isn't that? So in this case, it was a sense of, there's people that still, I think, want to speak to me, but just didn't get around to it. And then there's other people that sort of went, oh, I will speak to you. I'd love to speak to you, but then didn't answer the emails. So I thought, actually, maybe they really don't want to speak to me. And so that's why sometimes it took 3 or 4 years, because they went, oh, yeah, I'll speak to you. And then I just had to be patient.
Right. This is probably an unfair question, so you can expand on this. But was there a specific interview that changed the thesis of the way the book was going to go? Was there something that you spoke to someone and thought, right, this is the direction we're going to go in?
I think there were just certain people that you would speak to and you'd be like, oh, that's walking into the book. So, like somebody would tell you a funny story and you go, oh, that's got to go in the book, even in the middle of speaking to them. And
yeah,
I think for me, one of the driving lights was not actually an interview, but I was watching a symposium about Prince just after he died. I don't know, symposium seems like a pretentious word, but it was, a conversation with the whole of the music industry figures. And Spike Lee was part of it. And somebody called Prince a genius. And I've never forgotten it, but he kind of rolled his eyes. And I thought, that's interesting. Because obviously Prince is, by most metrics, people compare Mozart and Picasso a genius. But I think Spike Lee's point, as I understood it, and I hope I understood it correctly, was, and I spoke to a couple of academics about this as well, and one of whom does a Prince syllabus at Hutchins University called Zahir Ali.
Wow.
And he said something very intelligent that stayed with me in the book. And he said, genius erases the hard work. So Prince worked really hard. And I think for me, in terms of writing the book and, how many interviews did it take before you got into it? I did about 30 interviews and I thought, I don't know this guy. I don't know who this man is. And I feel a little bit more qualified after 220 interviews. I'm still not an expert, but, so for me, it was like just that thing of going, well, okay, every time somebody told a really funny story about him, and there's quite a few in the book, it was like, okay, how do I get them in? How do I make sure that tells the story of what he's like and who he was?
Just going back to Purple Rain, I remember when Purple Rain came out, because that was when Kerrang magazine, which is known as heavy metal, put Prince on the front cover, didn't they? Which was kind of like probably the most adventurous thing they ever did. Because they thought, well, this is worth a shot because he's a guitarist. But what is it about Sign of the Times that you feel is kind of has the edge over that to draw people in?
It's a very good question. What's your favorite Beatles album?
My favorite Beatles album would be Abbey Road.
And what's your favorite Rolling Stones album?
That would be Let It Bleed.
Okay. I thought you were going to say Exile, but my favorite Rolling Stones album is Exile.
Yeah.
And that's got a load of different, like as Keith Richards says, Mick Jagger is a nice bunch of guys. There's a nice bunch of guys in that record, and there's a nice bunch of Princes on Sign of the Times.
Yeah, because you described the title track as almost being like a blues song in some respects in the book, and I hadn't thought about that before, because I know there's lyrically it's about AIDS and it's quite a brave thing to do at that time. So when I was listening to that the other day, I thought, yes, I can see what you mean, that it has that kind of genre bending aspect to it.
Well, for me, I'm glad you didn't, listen to it and go flipping out, that Scottish guy's an idiot. I'm glad you agreed with me in the book. But what's interesting about Prince is look at Sign of the Times and Purple Rain are two very interesting songs in the sense of, you tell me, what's the genre of those songs?
They are, well, you can't really attach
anything. They're both pop music, right?
Yeah, they're pop music. Yeah.
Right? They're both pop music, and pop music is probably my favourite genre. You don't get to smash hits without being a fan of pop music, right?
Of course you don't.
But to get pop music right, to be able to get pop music, like Motown is music, at its finest in some respects. And both Purple Rain is like a country song, it's a blues song, it's a middle America radio ballad, it's a pop song. And Sign of the Times is really interesting because, it's blues, it's funk, it's pop. It's also, the book also addresses this a little, not to give the hard sell on the book too much, but this was the same year that Public Enemy and those guys were coming through on the Def Jam tour of this of the UK with Gold J and those guys. So lyrically, there's elements of hip hop in there as well. So again, it's just lots of different genres, and that to me is fascinating. That Prince does Prince. He doesn't. So much of music is segmented, and in fact, one of the things that was, when I was a music editor, it was becoming less interesting because music was becoming a little more segmented. And I think it's actually interesting now with artists like, Taylor Swift or Ray, is they kind of just, they defy genre a little bit. Or, someone like Fred again, where he'll just go, nah, I'm going to do what I'm going to do and just not really obey whatever the rules might be. And Prince was very much like that. And Sign of the Times, in terms of genre, just to finish this point, and it was a long point.
That's okay.
Is what's really interesting about Sign of the Times is look who covered it. So I'll give you a roll call, and this is mentioned, but Muse covered it, Simple Minds covered it. They're stadium rock bands. Shaka Khan covered it, who's Shaka Khan. Nina Simone covered it. Robert Glasper, the great jazz pianist, covered it. And I think Billy Cobham, the great jazz drummer, also covered it.
Yes.
So look at the breadth of people that do cover versions of that song. That doesn't happen if it doesn't have some stretchability and some mutability to it.
Yeah, well, especially as you mentioned like people like Billy Cobham, that these people are approaching a song like this because they want to stretch out and take it into different directions, don't they? And some of the other people you mentioned also took it in different directions, but it was still essentially recognizable as the core song that Prince did. In the book, I was lots of people talking to him about being he's polite, gentle, yet fiercely competitive. Obviously, people like Michael Jackson were very interested in trying to get closer to him. And I think you say in the book that one of the reasons why he became a good guitarist and played keyboards was to try and differentiate himself from Michael Jackson, that he could also play all these things, whereas Michael couldn't. I mean, that comes through the book really strongly, that he had a very kind of, I don't know how to describe his relationship with Michael Jackson, but it sounded like Michael Jackson wanted to be closer to him than he wanted to be close to Michael Jackson.
That sounds fair. I think that was one of the things I wanted to do in the book, because, why did you write about Sign of the Times rather than Purple Rain? And apart from the fact that Alan Light's already done a very good book on that, apart from that, Sign of the Times is fascinating because, this was also the year that he turned out Michael Jackson was following up Thriller with Bad. So it's the same year as that.
Yes.
So, it was George Michael was coming out with Faith. It was a very interesting time in music, as I said about the hip hop thing earlier, where that was really rising. U2 doing the Joshua Tree, Def Leppard doing Hysteria, which is a very interesting way to program rock music.
Yes, very true.
Guys from Sheffield just taking over the world with that. So, it was a fascinating time in music. And in terms of Prince and Michael Jackson, Prince overtook Michael Jackson at certain points of his career, but then he was also miles behind him in other times of his career in terms of sales. Yeah. And, the most famed artist, Michael Jackson, totally dwarfs Prince. Michael Jackson is still enormous in terms of, record sales and streams. But then I think artistically and in terms of, rock critics, and, you've grown up reading the music press, as have I, Prince is maybe artistically more interesting. So it's almost like they're having a race where one goes in front of the other every so often. And that fascinated me.
Yeah, very true. The other thing the book says that the women in his life were often very protective of him. What did that protection, do you feel, illuminate or conceal? Were they, was this kind of, did you feel anything that was why they were so protective towards him after all this time?
I think he was very gentle with them. I think, when you start a process like this, the worry is that you want to be, everyone's got their own integrity. So I didn't want to, if I had women phoning up saying, and a couple in the book didn't have the best experience with him. But, if I'd had, 10 women or 20 women all saying, oh, he was the absolute worst.
Yeah.
It would have been dishonest to shy away from that. But, that wasn't my experience. And, quite a lot of the women said, like from personal assistants to ex-girlfriends to engineers that worked with them to bandmates. And there was definitely a sense of like, you will look after him, you will be fair to him, won't you? Because he's not around to defend himself.
Yeah, true.
And that definitely stuck with me. So, I do hope that the book is fair.
No, it certainly comes across like that. I mean, he produced a lot of the stuff himself, didn't he? So he had no one saying it's finished. He had to make that decision himself. Do you feel that helped him, or did you think it hurt him sometimes? Because when did he know to put down his brushes, that he didn't have to do anything else?
It's a really good question. I've been asked that already, actually, and I think it depends on which side of the Prince fence you sit on. If you think that he did far too many records, and if you kind of buy into the idea of, for example, David Bowie was great in the 70s and not so great in the 80s, or the same with Joni Mitchell, or you buy into the fact that, I'm trying to think of sort of great tenets of rock criticism. Keith Richards' solo is better than Mick Jagger's solo. If you buy into certain, points of view of music, then I think you think, oh, Prince produced too much, he made loads of mistakes. I tried not to write the book like that. So, someone like Miles Davis was very interesting to me in terms of once I started digging into other artists and comparing them to Prince. And obviously, as the song goes, nothing compares to him. But in terms of just trying to understand him, so I compare Prince with Madonna, I compare Prince with Sly Stone, I compare Prince with even Kate Bush and periods, and just looking at how they did things and how he did things. So it was for me. That was one of the interesting things, was just looking at how he was different, how he was unique.
I suppose one of the ways that he was different is that he was always dressed for the stage, even if he was in the kitchen. So was that part of his kind of armor, his branding, or it's just who he was?
Yeah, one of the my favorite stories in the book was that I don't know if you remember the Diamonds and Pearl era of Prince, but I was lucky enough to speak to, I think, Pearl rather than Diamond, Roby Scott, who told me a very funny story about how he was wearing this extravagant outfit, all one all one color. I think it was red,
Yeah,
and there were, jodhpurs and high boots and very fancy belt. And he said, "I'm just going to go and change." And she looked at him for dinner and think, "Am I going to see you in, see you in something more comfortable? I'm actually going to get to see you in jeans for the first time ever," because he did not dress like Bruce Springsteen. I think that's fair to say. And he came down in exactly the same outfit in blue, same fancy. And he then said to her at a different point, he sort of said that because his parents had been poor when he was younger, he said he never wanted to look like the common man. So he always wanted to dress for the part. And, that was true of his girlfriends. It was true of his bandmates. Morris Hayes, who was his keyboard player for 20 years, told me, he said, rock stars should be Superman. You've got to dress like Superman. And I don't think he meant his underpants being on the wrong way around. I think he meant just looking sharp.
which he certainly did. One of the things in the book that's interesting is the obviously the conflict with Warner's when he changed his name and everything. I mean, how do you now read that, looking back on it, that kind of period when he, which was obviously must have been incredibly stressful for him?
It just made me think about how you treat people, actually. And, I think now he was incredibly brave. And at the time, I thought, he's gone mad. And I thought, what a weirdo, why would he do this? And then just hearing other artists talking about it and the fearlessness of it, and just a way to not be owned by anyone, because Warner Brothers stipulated that anything recorded under the name Prince they owned. So he just changed his name. And there's a funny story in the book. Well, people can judge if it's funny, but it amused me that he had he had someone working for him at the time at Paisley Park, and he said, "Can my passport be changed so that there's now a symbol in it rather than the word Prince?" And they got as far as the local post office because they thought, well, somebody at customs might be a Prince fan, maybe we can do it.
Yeah, wow.
It didn't work out, but that was the way he thought. This is a guy that sort of said, "I want a camel." In Minneapolis, they asked somebody at 1 a.m, famously, and Kevin Smith, the director, tells that story. And that wasn't in the book because I couldn't stand it up, but that's a kind of famous story about him. And, he wanted a fountain on stage for one of his tours. He was super, super ambitious.
I want to now talk about the part that one of the videos that has had millions of views online, which is obviously when my guitar gently weeps, which is when Prince appears alongside Jeff Lynne and Tom Petty and plays that guitar solo. And obviously I'm going to say, well, obviously he plays with such flash and exuberance and jaw-dropping kind of the stuff you'd expect a lead guitarist from that period or even now to do. But one of the things I wanted to say was, and this is in the book, is that it wasn't just about the fact he played lead. When you watch him in that video, it's the way he's playing rhythm at the same time as well. He was an incredible rhythm guitarist.
Yeah, I was. I see you've got a guitar there in your house, so you obviously you like to strum yourself. And Prince and guitar. I don't play guitar, but I was very aware of the heavy as the head that on the author that wears the author's crown, because I really wanted to make sure that I get the guitar stuff right. So there's a section on the guitars that you like to play. There's a section from other guitarists about what Prince was like as a rhythm guitarist. There's a section from other guitarists about what Prince was like as a lead guitarist. And then, as you say, so if you're into guitar as well as, into Prince, I can recommend this book because there's a lot about guitar in there. One of the things for me about Prince, and we'll talk about Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in a minute, if you want, but one of the things for me that was fascinating about Prince was that what a gifted guitarist. I mean, you don't need to see that solo to see it. You can see any Prince in concert clips and see what a great lead guitarist he was. But because he was so talented musically, he could play a guitar solo like that on record and then chuck it out and not use it on a record. and decide not because he was a producer, because he was an arranger, because he also played rhythm. And there's a section in the book about there's a very talented Minneapolis guitarist called Jimmy Berringer who still plays in the area, and I couldn't get hold of him, but I did get hold of people who played with him, and the Prince is only UK #1 under his name, which is The Most Beautiful Girl in the World. From what I hear, Jimmy Berringer's playing on that kind of pretty much saved it, made it special, elevated it, if you like.
Yeah.
And Prince apparently at the time in the studio said, I hate other guitar players. So he knew he didn't cut off his nose to spite his face. So he kept he kept Jimmy's playing on it. And the same with his own playing. So he was so talented that if he played a brilliant guitar solo, but it didn't work for the track, he would cut it out, because he could do that. And I'm glad as a fan, and as somebody a fan of music, as a fan of Prince, I'm glad that the world got to see that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame solo, and I'm glad it's on YouTube, because there's lots of reasons why the world might not have seen that. So I spoke to the producer of the show, and he went to Prince with the idea, and I think this is the kind of idea that Prince would not have done. But, it was quite out of character for Prince to do something like this, because he's kind of a subordinate to George Harrison, as, let's face it, most guitarists are. But, so he's paying tribute to somebody else, which is not something he always did. They've already made a fuss of him at the start of the evening with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So he's been honoured, and he's come back to do this. So he must have thought, yeah, maybe it's worth it. And he did say to the producer of the show, who's going to own this? And then I think he just moved on and went off the idea. But, it could have been the kind of thing that his people could have phoned up YouTube and said, you're making too much money out of this, I want you to shut it down. So in lots of different aspects of it are quite out of character for Prince. But so I'm very, very glad that it exists, and I'm very glad that it's out in the wild and that we can all enjoy it.
I think it's an amazing performance, because it isn't really, the song itself isn't what you would associate with Prince, and I don't feel that it's something that Prince would have felt that comfortable with, really. And I did feel that when you read the book and you know what Prince is like, that, and then if you imagine you're seeing this video for the first time and it's happening now, you'd think this could so easily go wrong, because it could overplay, it could dominate it, it could literally take the song, or the other musicians on stage could be a bit lost about where this is overpowering, but he doesn't. It actually blends in, and his guitar playing, it looks as if he's been rehearsing for weeks. But it isn't just the fact he's playing, it's the rhythm chops, but also the fact of his performance is so poetic and visual. It's a visual performance, not just an auditory one. And it's all done in that moment. That's what makes it so like jaw-droppingly, oh my God, really.
Yeah, and Andrew Watt, who's probably the most successful producer working in music right now. So he produced the last Stones album, he produced the new Lady Gaga album, he produced the Elton John and Brandy Carlisle album, and I was lucky enough to get to speak to him, and he says he's got a tattoo in his pinky of the Prince solo on his right hand. And he says every time that you play guitar, he's aiming for Prince at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And he talks about it exactly as you have just done. He talks about it in the sense of, he talks about the fact that he knows where the camera is at any given moment. He looks fantastic. He's sharp as a whistle.
Yeah.
And he plays the. I think somebody was quoted Tom Petty before he passed. I think one of the producers, one of the other bandmates. So there's a few bandmates that were interviewed that were on stage at the time. I couldn't get hold of Steve Winwood, and I couldn't get hold of Danny and Jeff Lynne, but most of the others I think are interviewed. And somebody said he knew the bars that it would take to tell the story of the solo, which I thought was very poetic. And there's two things that have happened recently that I'm glad. I think one is my book, I hope, but the second is one of the producers put a super cut out of a different cut, different edit from a different camera angle.
Yeah.
And both those things, both my book and that, dispel the idea that there was a myth that Tom Petty and Jeff Lynne were really upset with Prince and he'd showboated and he'd ruined George's evening. And, the book goes into it in depth, but they loved it. There was an accountant that went on the road with Tom Petty after he went on the road with Prince, and he said they never heard a negative word about Prince. I think Andrew Watt, who's interviewing the book, is a friend of Danny Harris, and he's talked about it as well, very glowingly. So it's one of those things where, it lives on and the memory endures. And I think the negatives have melted away, because there were some negatives at the time going, oh, Jeff Lynne's guitarist could have done that, or, Tom Petty could have done that. This guy was showing off. And I don't think that's true. I think.
No, well, yeah, Jeff Lynne's guitarist plays very tastefully, but I think what happens at the end when Prince comes on is he doesn't overplay, and it's theatrical. It is a theatrical performance, but
Yes.
it fits in, and every move he makes, and that's why I mentioned a few moments ago his rhythm work. Because he doesn't just fill the space with tons of notes. He actually does quite a bit of rhythm work as well that fits in. So there's lots of light and shade in it. I mean, I know there's that section in the book, The Guitarist, is really fascinating. I really love that part. But just for everyone, who were his main guitar influences?
Really good question. Jimmy Jam helped me out with that. The great Jimmy Jam of Jam and Lewis. Just love it. So he talked about Lindsey Buckingham, which I hadn't thought about, but then I hear it.
Yeah.
Alexander O'Neill, who worked with Prince in the time before he was sacked, talked about Jimmy Nolan, James Brown's rhythm guitarist. The two obvious guitarists that come up again and again and Tony Maiden, who played with Rufus and Shaka Khan, who's also in the book. Prince really liked him. He loved Larry Graham as a bass player, but I know we were talking about lead guitar and, electric guitar. But the two that come up again and again are Jimi Hendrix and Carlos Santana. And Jimi Hendrix, because he was a black guy that played rock and roll or rock music, comes up. But Prince's favorite guitarist, by all accounts, or most accounts, is Carlos Santana. And if you listen to I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man, you can hear it.
The sustain, yeah, you can.
Yeah, you can hear it.
Yeah, very much so. And I think the visual side is Jimi Hendrix. The way he uses his arms and makes the guitar part of him is obviously, you can tell that's a bit of Hendrix there.
And there's a story about he played he played a gig for Jimi Hendrix's dad one night, and and that was in the mid-80s, and from the person that was there in his inner circle who interviewed in the book said, I'd heard Jimi Hendrix before, and I saw him again that night.
Yeah.
So Prince knew who his audience was.
Yeah. Because there's lots of myths and truths about Prince. Do you feel that there's one myth you'd like to see fans retire? Do you think this book has kind of found one of those where you think, that people's preconceptions about Prince, there's one in particular that this book puts to rest?
Yeah, very important one. Should we go for a really serious one?
Yeah.
His favorite color was purple. It wasn't necessarily. I believe it was orange, according to his sister and one of his stylists at the time. But he loved all colors. And it was funny because the Sign of the Times period, if you know your Prince, he talks about, when You Got the Look, he talks about colour me peach and black, and he asked people to come to his concerts dressed in peach and black at the time. And I really wanted the book to be like peach and black, and the publisher said, it's got to be purple because that's what's going to, people are going to expect
that is what people think. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But so that's, I thought I'd give you a fun myth rather than some very worthy musical myth. But his favourite colour wasn't necessarily purple.
Okay. And is there one truth about Prince that deserves more oxygen that you feel that the book shines a light on?
I think hard work. I think I describe him as the most self-actualized pop star of all time. And what I mean by that, because people are like, what does that mean when they ask me? But it just means nothing was by accident. Everything was deliberate. Everything was calculated. And that sounds cold, but I don't mean it to sound cold. I just mean that he knew when he played gigs, he played them with intent. Everything on the record is there for a reason. When he took the bass off when Doves Cry, that happened for a reason. So everything is deliberate. When he does a wink to camera, it's all there. It's all there for a reason.
It says in the book that it's obviously not exactly true, but it says no one ever saw him sleep and no one saw him eat, because he was just he was on all the time, just working flat out.
Yeah, I tried not to get hung up in that too much because obviously I spoke to ex-girlfriends, so sleep and so on. But it wasn't. Yeah, everyone who worked with him. I mean, the stories were that he would be with an engineer till 4 or 5 in the morning and finish up. And they would go home and go, oh, thank goodness I get to sleep until I start again at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. And he would literally phone up their hotel where they were while they were brushing their teeth.
Yeah.
And he would say to them, I've got an idea for a track. Can you come back to the studio? And this was like 5 in the morning. So you can imagine that, working with him was pretty demanding. And Jimmy Jam said something interesting. I think he said, however good you think Prince is, he's better. So whatever instrument your audience plays, check out Prince playing it on the internet. So if they play drums, if they play bass, if they play lead guitar, or if they play rhythm guitar, or if they sing, just check out something like Sign of the Times and go, okay, because he plays drums and that, or check out some of the YouTube clips where he's playing bass. He plays bass to one of his tracks called Party Man. It's incredible. And you just think, yeah, okay. Oh, I thought Prince was just that guy that was a bit like Jimi Hendrix and a bit like James Brown. And actually dig deeper and you'll see, he's an amazing drummer. He's an amazing bass player. He's an amazing singer.
I mean, if you had to, this is one of these tricky questions. If you had to pick 3 Prince tracks to convince a skeptic that someone who doesn't really know much about Prince, where would you point them towards? Would it be 3 tracks? Or if that's too hard, would it be 3 albums? But I guess you're going to put Sign of the Times first if I say that.
Sign of the Times, Purple Rain, 1999 are all pretty. Or Parade is a great indicator in how talented he was as well. In terms of tracks, I mean, the title track of Sign of the Times is pretty good. The Ballad of Dorothy Parker on Sign of the Times. So I'll pick 3 songs from Sign of the Times, right? That'd be fair?
Yeah, fine.
It sounds like I don't like any of his other records, which I do. But, Sign of the Times, Ballad of Dorothy Parker, The Cross are all very good indicators of just how his different gifts.
Is there one personal story that's that you uncovered while researching this book that's kind of really moved you and still does?
Yeah, I'd always known that he wasn't super out there with his philanthropy, but the more people I spoke to about donations and his private donations and how he supported people and how low key he was, and this was also true when George Michael passed. A lot of stories came out about how generous he'd been under the radar. But there's a section towards the end of the book just about how much Prince did for people. And there's a story, one of his record company execs, and she said Mary Lou Bedeau, there was a girl that was close to death, and she'd asked for an autograph from Prince, and he wrote a handwritten note of about 14 pages or something like that, and it was read out to her, and her eyes opened, and it was the last thing she heard before she died.
Wow.
And very moving. And I don't know if you're a James Brown fan. I suspect you're a fan of all sorts of music. Clyde Stubblefield, the funky drummer. I mean, flipping heck. Imagine if hip hop had to pay him for every beat that actually taken.
Except all the samples.
His widow would be living in a house in I don't know, Beverly Hills or Regent's Park. But Prince paid for his medical bills, and she told me that story. And I was very moved by that, just in terms of how he quietly said, how much does he need? Yeah, and how he did it. Yeah. And no mess, no fuss, as they used to say in the Domestos adverts.
Yeah. If Prince could read your book, hypothetically, which chapter would make him smile or maybe give you a call at 5 a.m.?
I think there's a chapter about the premiere of Under the Cherry Moon, and of course I've thought that. I'm not so foolish.
Oh, is that the one when he walks out? Is that?
That's the start of the book, is how he walks out to the premiere. But so I think it's chapter 7 or 8, and it's about MTV, and it's about all the crazy competitions that MTV ran in the 80s. And I think that would make him laugh, because he did laugh at himself. I think that's a myth that he didn't laugh at himself, or that he had no sense of humor. He was a really funny guy by all accounts, by people close to him. And I think he would have laughed at, that the book deals with these mad competitions. And MTV ran a competition, the 10,000th caller would win the Under the Cherry Moon premiere in their hometown.
Yeah.
And so it ended up in Sheridan, Wyoming, which was real cowboy country. But what amused me about that was, I then dug into, and again, because I love all sorts of music, and I grew up in that time, so I wanted to talk about all the other MTV competitions. So they had Win a Night Out with Van Halen, and somebody shotgun. Eddie Van Halen made the winner shotgun a beer, and he blacked out because he had brain trauma the year before, and Eddie Van Halen didn't know that.
Oh my God.
And they had John Cougar Mellencamp did a song called Pink Houses. I think it was Pink Houses.
Yeah.
And it was like Win a Pink House in John Cougar Mellencamp's hometown, and it was next door to Holiday Chemical Waste, so they had to get rid of it.
Oh my God.
And Win the Batmobile was another competition they had.
Yeah.
And the IRS demanded a certain chunk, so they sold the Batmobile the next day. So I couldn't resist just pointing out all these other MTV competitions, because that shows you how big MTV was in the 80s.
Yeah.
Also, there are also funny stories as well.
Yeah, brilliant. This was a 5-year project. So are you thinking about another music project going, or are you having a bit of a break? And this has only just come out, everybody. So, I mean, that was, again, what a question to ask.
Yeah, during it, I thought that would make an interesting book. That would make an interesting book. That would make an interesting book. I find the fastest way to make sure something doesn't happen is to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
So I feel if I talk about a book, then it won't happen. I'd love to write more music books. It's not, you won't find that many music book writers with yachts. So it's, I've got a day job, and I love my day job, but it's fascinating and challenging and invigorating. But it's finding time to do it. But I'd love to write more music books. Probably not another one about Prince, though.
No. Maybe Stevie Wonder?
That has been discussed. Yeah, Stevie Wonder's run in the early 70s was remarkable.
Yeah,
sorry,
it was, wasn't
you
it?
gave me the question there. I'm sorry, I didn't answer it properly. I'd love to write that book if people would love to read it. But I think that whole section of music, for me, it's up there with the Beatles in terms of what he did.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, John, thank you. That was fantastic. And this book, Sign of the Times, John McKie, is out now on Bonnier Books. I shall put the links into the description on YouTube and on all the podcast channels as well. But thank you so much, John, for your time today. It's a really highly recommended book. And like I said, the part on the guitar stuff is really well research, but the whole thing really just started. And just finally, I love the way that you've used Sign of the Times as this kind of capsule. Everything else rotates around it, but you've managed to tell the story of Prince while still being focused on one album, which is a very...
That was the plan. I mean, it's not... I shouldn't say it's not for everyone, because obviously you want everyone to buy your book, but I knew that the structure was going to jump around a little bit, but I think it was worth it. I think Prince is worth it, because I think that he's so multifaceted. Things like his parties in 2006-7, around the 31-21 period, and the O2 gigs, you've got to mention them. Yeah. And then the Super Bowl halftime gig, you've got to mention that.
You've got to mention that,
And then the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, as you say, you've got to mention that.
You've got to mention that, yeah.
And then you go back and you go, well, Dirty Mind and that front cover, that propelled him to a whole different level of fame, where Mick Jagger and Nile Rodgers and Gene Simmons from Kiss were going to go and see him in New York in a tiny club. So you've got to mention that, and then
that's right. But it does it reads like one of these modern TV dramas where it suddenly goes 10 years later, 4 years ago. It just jumps. But I think people are used to that now. I think they are.
I think the readers can handle it. I hope they can anyway.
I think they can. Well, thanks, John. It's been great talking to you. And the book is out now. And as I say, I'll put the links into everywhere that this goes. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye. A huge thank you to my guest, John McKie. His book, Sign of the Times, is probably the definitive book on Prince. How many others out there, like me, remember seeing Prince appear on the front of Kerrang in the early 80s and thinking, what's Prince doing on the front of Kerrang? It should be, purple or leopard or whatever. But if you've watched the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame clip of Prince playing the guitar, you'll know why he was on that, although that obviously way before that event ever happened. But this is a great book. It's out on Bonnier Books, and it's obviously, if you're a Prince fan, you're going to enjoy this. 220 interviews were made with absolutely everybody with anything to do with it. Ex-girlfriends, bouncers, everything I said at the very start. And it's a really interesting book, and it's very interesting how John uses Sign of the Times as the kind of prism at which the whole story of Prince's life bounces around. So, as I said, with modern dramas where you 1 minute you're here, then you 8 years in the future, and then you 20 years back. It does that, but it tells the story really, really well. And obviously for me personally, into guitars and being raised on rock, the section on guitars and his influences and, Santana and Hendrix, etc., I found really interesting. But a superb book, and really love that, talking to John McKie. Fantastic author. And although he was also the editor at Q Magazine for a while as well, and Smash Hits. But this book is out now, and it's well worth reading. So stick it on your Christmas list, I would. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing to the podcast, and also visiting the website at nowspinning.co.uk. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you become a patron or YouTube member, you can also get access to our private Facebook group, our WhatsApp groups, and come along to our own virtual pub called the Now Spinning Arms, which meets up twice a month, where we can meet up via Zoom and you can talk to like-minded people. Oh, we have our own merch. Did I mention that? So, and you get 15% off if you're a patron. I think my accent's becoming even more Birmingham-based the more of these I do. But thank you very much for being here. Thank you for all of your support. Remember, music is the healer and the doctor. Take care, all of you. Keep spinning those discs, and I'll talk to you all very, very soon on my next episode.